All right, welcome everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always ready to dive in.
Great. So today we're taking a look at When Breath Becomes Air. Have you had a chance to read it yet?
I have, and honestly, it's one of those books that just stays with you.
It does, yeah. It's Paul Kalanithi's story. He was a neurosurgeon.
Right, and I think what really gets you is the fact that he was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer at 36, no less.
Way too young.
Exactly. And the book, it's not just like a straight memoir.
Right. It's got those reflections woven in. Really makes you think about life and death.
And meaning, too. Like, what does it all mean?
Exactly. And he brings in his background in both medicine and humanities.
Yeah, I mean, the guy studied English, literature, and philosophy before becoming a neurosurgeon. Kind of unique, right?
Definitely. So let's start there. Like, how do you think those seemingly different fields, literature and neurosurgery, how do those play into his outlook, especially when he's facing his own mortality?
Well, I think the humanities, they kind of give you this framework for thinking about the tough stuff.
The tough stuff.
Yeah, the ethical and existential questions that come up in medicine all the time, especially when you're talking about end-of-life care.
Right.
The humanities push you to really think about what it means to be human, to grapple with those questions of meaning and purpose that, honestly, we all face, whether we're doctors or patients.
And that comes through big time in Paul's writing, I think, especially when we see him shift from the doctor to the patient.
Yeah, talk about a tough transition.
Going from giving the diagnosis to receiving one that basically changes everything.
Right. And not just any diagnosis, but, one that's life-altering. I mean, how did that impact him? I mean, emotionally. And what kind of perspective did it give him, being on the other side of things?
Must have been pretty profound.
Oh, totally. I mean, we can all kind of understand death intellectually, but when you're actually facing it yourself, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
And for Paul, it wasn't just about the physical symptoms or
It
anything.
was deeper than that.
Way deeper. It was like an identity shift almost.
Wow.
Think about it. You spend your whole life, learning how to heal people.
Right.
And then suddenly you're the one who needs healing.
That's heavy.
It is. And it really shows us, how vulnerable we all are as humans. Like, we often forget that. And I think doctors, even with all their expertise, they're not immune to that.
Of course not.
Facing their own mortality, it can make them more empathetic. It can help them understand patient care in a way you just can't learn from a textbook.
You can't. And I think all of this really pushed Paul to wrestle with some of life's biggest questions. Like, what makes life meaningful when you know you're dying? What parts of his exploration of that really hit home for you?
It's hard to pick just one thing, but one thing that really struck me was, how Paul realized that meaning, like true meaning, it doesn't have to be about these big accomplishments or living a super long life.
It's more than that.
Yeah, he found it in the small stuff.
Small stuff, like what?
The everyday moments, the connections with people he loved, and just the pursuit of knowledge and purpose, even though his time was limited. It really made me rethink my own ideas about success.
Success, yeah. Like how we define it.
Totally. And fulfillment, too. I think it reminds all of us, like as listeners, that finding meaning, it's not like a checklist you got to complete.
It's sort of that.
It's about being present, savoring the journey, all those everyday experiences that add up to a life,
And the things that matter.
Exactly.
And it's interesting, too, how this all ties into ambition. Like how we can get so caught up in chasing it.
Right.
Paul was at the top of his field. He had this bright future. Then, boom, the diagnosis hits. Everything has to be reevaluated.
Yeah. I mean, it's a harsh reality check for sure.
Definitely.
Reminds us that, well, our plans, they can be pretty fragile. And how often we get caught up in this pressure to achieve, to achieve, to achieve.
All the time.
It can make us forget to actually live in the moment. Paul really struggled with that. Like, how do you balance your hopes and dreams with the reality that things could change at any moment? It's something we all deal with, that tension between striving for the future and being present right now.
It's a constant battle.
It is. And I think Paul's story is a good reminder that, achievements can fade, but the moments we share, the love we give and receive, that's what sticks around.
That's the real legacy. And speaking of love, Paul's relationship with his wife, Lucy, it's so central to the book. Their choice to have a child, knowing his prognosis, that was incredible.
It was.
What are your thoughts on that, especially in light of all his reflections on life and legacy?
Well, it shows you the power of love, right? And how deep that human need for connection is. Even when you're facing loss,
Yeah.
you can just feel the joy Paul found in being a father. It deepened his understanding of what life really meant.
It did.
It's a complicated situation, though, bringing a new life into the world. When you're facing your own mortality, well, it's tough. Definitely.
But it also shows how joy and sorrow, hope and grief, how those things can coexist. It really makes us think about what truly matters at the end of the day. It's the legacy we leave, the love we nurture. Those are the things that last.
Absolutely. And the book doesn't shy away from talking about death. I mean, given Paul's situation, it's kind of unavoidable. What struck you about the way he approaches mortality?
Well, I think what's really interesting is that Paul embraces the fact that death is inevitable.
You're all going to face it, right?
We are.
Mm.
And he doesn't just see it as a medical event. It's part of life, a big part. And he encourages us to talk about it openly. Death, end-of-life care, those things are often taboo.
They are.
But he brings it into the light. And it really fits in with this whole death positivity movement that's been growing.
Death positivity.
Yeah, it's about acknowledging death, preparing for it. Like, it's a natural part of life, And Paul's approach encourages us to think about our own mortality, to have those conversations that can be hard, but they can also help us live more fully while we're here. Live more fully, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's incredible, isn't it, that Paul was able to share all these insights while he was fighting cancer.
It is.
He finished most of the book before he passed. And then Lucy, his wife, added that really beautiful epilogue.
Yeah,
His story has touched so many people.
it has.
And it's really started these important conversations about, well, living and dying well. What does that even mean?
When breath becomes air, it's more than just a memoir. It's like an invitation to reflect.
To reflect.
It pushes us to ask ourselves, what does a life well lived look like? Not for someone else, but for me, right here, right now.
And it reminds us that meaning, it's not something we find off in the future somewhere.
Right.
We create it every day.
Every single day.
Through the choices we make, the actions we take, the connections we build.
That's it.
So if you're looking for something that will make you think, make you feel, make you question everything, check out When Breath Becomes Air.
It's worth the read.
It is. What parts resonated with you? What will you take away from Paul's journey? We'd love to hear your thoughts.